right, so we're going to pick up with hearing, talking about our ears. So audition is kind of our fancy word for hearing, talking about, very similar to what we were talking about with vision, the transduction process where the sound waves come in. We still talk about the amplitude and the frequency, just like we did with the vision and the light waves. But this time, instead of talking about how it hits our eye, we're talking about how it hits our ear. So frequency for hearing is the number of complete wavelengths that pass a point at a given in a given time per second per minute. And this is one of the foundations for how and what we hear. And then we also talk about pitch, which the tone experienced highness or lowness, which depends on frequency. Again, this is very similar to what we were talking about with wavelengths in vision and the amplitude and the wavelength of the sound wave versus the light wave. So the ear is separated into three major sections: the outer ear, the middle ear, and then the inner ear. So the outer ear is composed of the auditory canal and the eardrum. Those are kind of the two major sections of the outer ear. So if we look at our kind of the way that the ear is set up, you can see the outer ear, your actual ear piece, okay, and then all the way up until you hit your eardrum, including your eardrum. This is what we consider our outer ear. Okay, so the sound waves come in. Sometimes people ask, what's the ear for? Well, the ear actually catches the sound waves. It helps to catch the sound waves, and that's why, like, if you've ever been like listening to TV and you take your ear and you go like this as you're talking, it'll change what you're saying. Even right now, while I'm lecturing, you can kind of just, take your ear, the outer ear, and kind of just move it, and you can hear differently. Like the sound should sound different. And then when you're talking, just try talking out loud, move this, and you're going to see, because your ear acts as a catch kind of the sound waves. So the sound travels down the auditory canal and it hits your eardrum. Okay, and the eardrum is basically a tight membrane that vibrates when it's struck by sound waves. Very similar to just a regular drum. Piece of just a membrane spread over right there that kind of protects your ears. This is why you're not supposed to use Q-tips too far in your ear, because you can pop your eardrum or you can damage your eardrum if you stick them in too far. All right, then once, we kind of go into the middle ear. Okay, the middle ear is composed of the three small bones, which kind of their layman's term is the hammer, the anvil, and the stirrup. Okay, so again, if we look at the structure of our ear, we can see the outer ear is everything up to the eardrum. Whoops, I guess the eardrum right here. This is all outer ear. Okay, and then the middle ear are these three bones of the middle ear right here. Okay, so what happens? The sound wave is coming in, vibrates the eardrum. Okay, and then that vibration then is carried through the bones of the middle ear. So the anvil, right? The hammer, the anvil, and then the stirrup. So the sound wave comes through, right? Vibrates up like this. The hammer drops the anvil, which then vibrates the stirrup, which is this piece right here. Now, the oval window is where the stirrup connects to the cochlea. Okay, so the cochlea is the kind of the snail-looking thing. So it's kind of the last piece. And then the cochlea is a bony fluid-filled tube in the inner ear that the sound waves go through to trigger the neural impulse. So this is where that whole transduction process happens. Okay, and then we hit the inner ear. Okay, so again, outer ear, middle ear, inner ear. The inner ear is composed of the oval window, which is, remember, the stirrup hits the oval window and continues that vibration. Okay, the cochlea, which is this thing, it kind of looks like the snail. Okay, it's like the snail shell. Okay, and it's this curvy thing right here, and it's a fluid fill. Now inside the cochlea, all along inside the cochlea, is lined with these little things called basilar membranes, and we'll talk about those in just a second. And then the auditory nerve, these things right here, it's connected to the cochlea. So as the sound wave travels through, it hits over here where the auditory nerve connects, and then it pulls it into your auditory cortex part of your brain. So again, just to go through in a different view, we have, the sound wave. Let me get my pen up. The sound wave comes in, the vibrates the eardrum, goes up the hammer, anvil, stirrup, okay, which then hits the oval window, which triggers the process of the sound wave traveling through the cochlea, okay, and then the back of the cochlea is lined with all of the auditory nerve. So the auditory nerve is the nerve which sends the auditory message to the brain via the thalamus. Remember, the thalamus is the part of the brain that relays all of this sensory information. So just like with our vision, after it had passed through the optic nerve, it goes through the thalamus, and then it goes to the occipital lobe, the visual cortex. With the auditory stuff, after it goes through the auditory nerves, and then it goes through the thalamus, and then it goes to our auditory cortex, which is predominantly in our temporal lobes. All right, more slides. Sending our neural potency. I get ahead of myself even when I do it this way, guys. So we talked about, I kind of briefly mentioned before this idea of synesthesia. So let's take a look at this little clip.
Science Central. Neurobiologist Melissa Saenz will never forget the day she showed this silent video to a group of students.
Out of the blue, one of those students asked, "Does anybody else hear something?"
And everyone looked at me like I was crazy.
But Saenz realized that Johannes Pultz-Korenberg might have a cross-wiring of the senses, a condition called synesthesia. His is a newly identified form of the condition. He hears motion. When looking at normally silent things like birds hopping, he hears sounds like this.
You.
Saenz interviewed hundreds of people to find others with the same condition and then tested them.
My goal was to devise a task for which people with this synesthesia would have an advantage if their sound perceptions were real.
In a dark room, she asked people with and without the condition to listen to pairs of beeps like this and decide whether they were the same. Both groups scored equally well. But when asked to differentiate between pairs of visual flashes like this, the people with the condition outperformed regular people.
The individuals with synesthesia could still do the task very well because they not only saw the visual flashes, but they also heard them.
No one knows yet if this experimental advantage translates to real-world advantages. But Pultz-Korenberg says life's just more interesting when you have your own soundtrack. For Science Central News, I'm Sunita Reed.
So that's called synesthesia, and we will talk more about this. Hopefully one of our groups will present and talk about this and show us some really cool stuff with that. But yeah, basically it's the cross-wiring of the brain and the information. Okay, so back to this basilar membrane. Remember our cochlea, the fluid-filled kind of the snail shell in our inner ear is lined with all of these things, these hair cells, these tiny little hair cells called basilar membrane. And basically they kind of look like this. This is an up-close view of them. But basically they stick up, and because remember this is all kind of swimming in fluid, and as the sound wave is moving through, it's vibrating these basilar membrane, and that's one of the things that causes the sound wave to progress through the cochlea. Now, if you've ever been to a loud concert or after a school dance, and you get that fuzzy feeling in your ears where you can't hear, or you kind of have that afterthought, that after sound, well, the reason for that is your basilar membrane, these hair cells, these are the things that are, they're vibrating still because they were so damaged and so stimulated with all of that loud music that you've either killed them, okay, so their friends are screaming at you. That's kind of what I say, is that like you've killed off some of these poor little basilar membranes, and the rest of their friends are screaming at you and like mourning and wailing that he died, you killed him, because the loud music can overstimulate these poor little guys, and then cause them to kind of decay or collapse or go away. And that's one of the reasons why when we tell you don't listen to loud music when you're a kid for too long is because of this idea that, you know, you can kill, if you kill too many of these basilar membranes, there's not going to be anything to progress things through the cochlea. So in terms of the cochlea and loud sounds, you can see in decibels, you know, like the threshold of hearing, you know, when we talk about like the absolute threshold of hearing is right here about 0. Okay, a whisper is at 20, normal conversation at 60, a busy street corner is about 80, and then as we get up, you can see things, you know, up until 140, a rock band, loud dance, okay? And prolonged exposure above 85 decibels is, you know, proven to produce hearing loss. So that's one of the reasons why, you know, we're so concerned with you guys putting the loud music in your headphones all the time and constantly having that, because that's prolonged exposure. And you definitely listen to those, some of you listen to those very, very loud. So how do we perceive pitch and how do we perceive sound? And there's a couple of theories. The first one is the place theory. And basically it says in hearing, the theory that links the pitch to the pitch we hear to the place where the cochlea's membrane is stimulated. Okay, so again, place theory. Oh, where's my pen? Place theory is the place on the cochlea where the membrane is stimulated. Okay, so that's just kind of like, you know, remember that the cochlea is the fluid-filled snail thing in your ear. So depending on the pitch and depending on how the wavelengths of the sound wave hit, it's going to hit in different places. And so where it hits determines the pitch. Now, and this has to do a lot with high-pitched sounds. This is one of the where it helps us determine high-pitched sounds. Now, for low-pitched sounds, we have something called the frequency theory, which is the theory that the rate of nerve impulses traveling up the auditory nerve matches the frequency of a tone, thus enabling us to sense its pitch. So basically what this means is how fast it is traveling and hitting those auditory nerves along the back of the cochlea. It tells us how what pitch that we are going to hit. And this, again, is predominantly the low pitch sounds. So the place theory, place for high pitch, okay, and then the frequency theory is how often for low pitched. And then in terms of how we locate sounds, again, 2 ears, 2 sides, and we use a lot of the where, you know, which ear does it hit first, you know, which it registers the information first, which side of the brain registers the information first, and then also the intensity. You know, if we look at our little illustration here, you can see that, so the bell's ringing, it hits this side first, and then this ear doesn't get hardly any of the sound because your head is blocking it out. So our brain knows how to register those kinds of things, you know, which side of the brain processes it first, where is it louder, which intensity does it get it, is it slower, is it faster, and these are some of the ways that we can locate sounds as well. Now, in terms of hearing loss, and deaf culture, you know, there's 2 major types of hearing loss. There's conduction hearing loss, and then there's sensorineural hearing loss. Conduction hearing loss has to do with damage to the mechanical system that conducts sound waves into the cochlea. So, for instance, your eardrum, the 3 bones of your middle ear. So this is why, you know, somebody who say like gets hit in the side of the head really hard, and if for some reason one of the 3 bones was broken, or if you pop your eardrum or you damage your eardrum, this is what we can call conduction. Because again, remember the eardrum, the hammer, the anvil, the stirrup, those things all conduct the sound waves and start that initial transduction process. So if something happens there, we call it conduction hearing loss. Now the sensorineural hearing loss is caused by damage to the cochlea's receptor cells or to the auditory nerves. Okay, this sometimes is referred to as nerve deafness. Okay, so this is where, you know, listening to loud music and killing all your basilar membranes. This is where, you know, nerve damage, old age, you know, your nerves just start to decay, things like that. This is what happens. This is where we start to get this neural nerve deafness. So, but cochlear implants are something that we are starting to discover. So this little picture here, you can kind of see some of the technology that we have. And it's basically a device for converting sounds into electrical signals and stimulating the auditory nerve through electrodes threaded into the cochlea. So it's kind of just like fake basilar membrane almost, where they're going in and it's doing this transduction process that your cochlea typically does for you. And this kind of controversial in the deaf culture because the deaf culture is very inclusive, and they very much pride themselves sometimes on creating a culture of their own. But it is something that's can be very groundbreaking, especially for children who are born with sensory neural hearing loss, where we can go in and do these cochlear implants so that they can actually hear. All right, that wraps that